Photography for me is something that shows a perspective on an image or an object or something like that. Just one direction of looking at something.
Oh, is that it?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw.
It's one of those things that, you know, with a surveying background, you're used to kind of looking at things and measuring things, and kind of I realized that, well, I might have having the fun of playing with my father's cameras, and was introduced to cameras and photography quite early on as a kid, both, you know, of course, being recorded or photographed, and that was going from film camera right the way through now to playing with him with digital and video recording. It's interesting. It's one direction. It's one perspective. And that's where some of the new photography, you might say, is getting kind of an interesting blur between film and photos, with the kind of 3D perspectives that you're now getting with multiple lenses looking at something, rather than photography for me has often been a single lens and a single direction that you can look at something at.
Mm-hmm. Right. Merrin Pearce, thank you. Thank you for joining me on Shooting It Raw. I was thinking about it, like, how long have I known you? I'm not even sure.
As long as at least something like shark finning or some animal rights thing has been going on or something like that. And I've been in Hong Kong 14 years, so somewhere in that period, I'd say, Rand.
Yeah, exactly. Let's just dive into the photos. And, you know, one of the pillars of the podcast is that of conservation.
Yeah.
And so there seems to be, I seem to know a lot of conservationists, or that seems to be an important value for me, and definitely one that I want to share with others.
Yeah, conservation might be one word these days that kind of has one, well, let's go back to the photography, one perspective, one view on things. But as people start realizing and getting into whatever they're concerned about conserving and why they're trying to conserve it, then they have to answer other questions and start balancing other perspectives or other impacts. And that's where you might go from being in conservation, we're like tree huggers as such, you know, someone that would stop a tree being chopped down back in what, 60s, 70s. There was a lot of that side of it. And we're still fighting for trees to be stopped, to be chopped down today, particularly in our oceans, because that's happening out of sight. Though the conservation word now is kind of drifting into the business world, I think, through this word sustainability. Mm-hmm. You know, CSR, ESG, all these different acronyms, and it becomes, how are you going to continue as one species living with other species or other things around? And that's where I think the core of the conservation movement started, realizing how things are all interrelated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's just start with the first photo. So you sent me, I don't know if it's a self-portrait or somebody made the photo of you. You have a very kind of a natural, open, positive, smiling face at the camera. It looks like you're in Hong Kong. And behind you, there's Sun Street, which is just so, you know, it's so perfect that it's just kind of pointing at your head, and you have a nice smile. It's you take up like 80%. You know, it's a very sweet portrait. I would say it's in a residential area of Hong Kong. I don't know that it's on Lantau, but what was this situation?
Yeah, so we're actually halfway between Wan Chai and Admiralty in Hong Kong Island. It's one of the little side streets up in there where there's a nice little cafe. And we were just sitting there on one Sunday morning after actually the Kiwi Ball, and chilling, having some breakfast there. And it was a photo taken by my wife, Louise. She was just sitting across the small coffee table from me there. So you're on a back streetscape, trees around you. You're kind of outside, but you're in the environment. You're certainly not in the open areas of Hong Kong. And we were sitting there happily watching dogs under the table and of other people, and people just enjoying their Sunday mornings.
Nice, nice. Well, look, I think, you know, if we think of each, either, like, for example, a photograph being an expression of, you know, how you want to to frame the conversation, right? Whether implicitly or explicitly. I think this kind of sets the tone very nicely for what kind of person you are, as far as how I've seen you and how I've kind of experienced you, which is not especially flashy and yet warm and inviting. And you know, I don't know if I'm the only person who says this, but kind of no pretensions. No, I mean, is that a very Kiwi, a New Zealand character trait, you'd say, or would you say that's just kind of how you're made?
Partly Kiwi and partly even more so me. And yeah, like you say, in the back there's the photo that says Sun Street. And I always try and look on the bright side of things, or look for the positive angle. You know, there's always something that can be worse, or something worse you could say to someone or that. So why not just keep going with the more encouraging positive side, and then work out where your differences are. You might say on that negative, darker side, and then you can work out how the conversation can move together and you see common interest or objective. So that too is an interesting photo, because that's a pretty clean cut looking hairdo on that shot as well. You know, I've gone from hair lengths that are way beyond my shoulder, all, you know, variety of different colored hair and things like that through my life. And it's one of those things people go, oh, what's your hair up to kind of now? And it's just like, well, I just felt like getting a short haircut. Oh, I didn't get round to getting it cut for a while. And so it's that kind of approach, I'd say, that you're airing, is like, how do we get going and make fun of this opportunity? Let's see the bright side of things.
Right. So, okay. So, you said you got to Hong Kong 15 or so years ago. So what brought you out here?
Well, I actually had a franchise for team building and personality training business that we had. There was 4 of us, my wife Louise and I, plus 2 other people had this franchise. And we're all Kiwis, and there was a person running it up here in Hong Kong. So we've been traveling up here for a year and a half or so before we moved up to Hong Kong. And we took on the challenge, you might say, of coming to a new country and running a franchise around people development, getting people working together in teams in a stronger, more understanding way, because we all know that there's different styles of people in the world. And I think that's what I have enjoyed through my kind of university life, realizing, or school life type of thing, as well as sports things, that, you know, there's these people called introverts that don't really like talking on radio shows, or they just want to read books. And, you know, how do you work with those people? And it's this kind of fun that's like, I'm into so much like technology and wanting to try out new things, but it's also like, well, what's the old way of doing this? That might be the best. So with that interest of trying to get people to try new things, but know what the best option might still be the old way. And that's where I got into the team building side of things. And it works really well for me to say, right, now I need to be quiet and let someone else think about that for a while and give them time to come back and respond. So I'm quite happy thinking and talking at the same time, or I have to talk to think, some people tell me.
Mm-hmm. I didn't know this about you. I've only known you in the capacity of somebody who goes out into the world and talks about conservation issues, indirectly or directly. I hear you on the radio, RTHK, the main sort of public radio here in Hong Kong. Yep. Like, walk me through that evolution of you, coming out here to do, I had no idea you're doing team building.
Yeah. Well, maybe there's a little bit of background to kind of steps back between that, which are kind of these life kind of little journeys along the way. So if I try and do that in a semi-short version, but it's probably going to take a few minutes. Brought up on a dairy farm in New Zealand, so had animals around you. We're about 8 k's up the river from the beach. We'd go off to the lakes, we'd go to the bush. You're always out and about. You saw the life cycles happening around you. You know, there's life and death happening regularly, almost daily around you, and interactions. And that's really got me excited in nature. But I love numbers, and I was actually studying accounting and economics when at high school. Because I was good with numbers. I didn't like languages, you know. Or I tried to get out of English as quickly as I could, and I managed to get out of that in my last year at school. But last year at high school, there was an earthquake in Edgecombe, New Zealand, Island, for those, Middle North Island. And when the earthquake had happened, it wasn't the first earthquake we'd been through. And the house had got shaken off its piles, and you kind of going, man, there's a bit of damage around. Luckily, no one was hurt. And a few days later, or maybe a week or so later, some land surveyors went past the gate and with these levelling kind of stuff. And I said, what are you measuring? You know, inquisitive boy leaning over the farm fence. And they said, oh, just the new heights. And I knew the farm had changed because the back drain now was no longer running. It was kind of semi-tidal.
Oh,
One
wow.
of the farm had dropped 2.05 meters. Now,
Wow.
for most people, if you put your hand up and tip your fingers up, that's about the length. We're talking, you know, it's the normal room height of a building in a house or that. So it's like, well, how do you measure that? Where's the reference point? Where's zero? If the whole land's moved, I'm like, what? And then they started showing me some stuff, and I started seeing, because they came back the next day to repeat their observations, and it was like, wow, this is kind of cool technology. So I ended up doing a land surveying degree, went down to Dunedin and Otago, and what I loved about that degree was I didn't want to be a property boundary surveyor, someone who was putting a peg in the corner of a property. And that's like digging up compost heaps and things like that. I want to play with technology and do different things. But I realized the degree had a really interesting mix of business, law, presentation, communication. It was quite a broad degree because it was setting up people to run their own surveying business, which is how industry worked. Ended up working for the New Zealand government and was very lucky when GPS technology was first starting to be put into surveying and engineering. So I was traveling the country, training people on equipment, flying to amazing parts of New Zealand and also the back gullies of New Zealand. And I mean the back of factories, the back of industrial sites. And it just got me thinking about our development approach, how we're polluting our country in so many ways. And that's globally. That's everyone's country I'm talking about here, not just New Zealand. You know, New Zealand is looked at as being clean and green, but in perspective, when you consider we're about 5 million people spread across the same size as Japan, and what are they, 140, it's pretty easy to hide your bad behavior.
Yeah.
So New Zealand's done a lot of work at tidying itself up, and that's part of what I hope I've been part of. So this surveying degree, and then moving into working with government for 9 years, where you're writing standards and policy and trying to convince stakeholders to become more supportive of the direction you want to take the surveying. I was able to use that at the same time as I was doing my volunteer work in the nature space.
Oh, wow.
And this is where I would be helping with tree planting and bird recovery programs. And there was one particular one that I was on where I took 2 weeks holiday to go down to the bottom of the South Island. There's an island off there called Stewart Island, and next to that is another one called Whenuaho. And it is where they have the kakapo, which is New Zealand's flightless parrot.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And I'm so amazing. Yeah, just look kakapo, Kakapo.
Yeah.
Kakapo Recovery Project. Back in the mid-80s, there was only about 50 birds known in the world.
Wow.
And when I was there in the, what was this? It would have been 2000, early 2000, 2001. We'd got to about 87. And what we're doing is helping the birds continue to breed. So one day I was walking along holding a red toolbox, a little small toolbox. And inside that were 3 fertile kakapo eggs.
Oh, wow.
And you're walking over muddy terrain, you know, roots, slogging through things. And you're going, it's not very often you get to carry, let's say 3% of the world's population of a species.
Wow.
I don't want to fall over now, do I? That's not going to look good on the ceiling. But it was just like, wow.
How amazing.
That's just like, yeah. And then people say to me, oh, wow, that'd be cool to be part of. And I say to them, here in Hong Kong, we have things like the Chinese white dolphin, pink dolphin, or the finless porpoise. They're around 100. Guys, you can be involved with projects just about anywhere when you stop and think about it. And that got me really deep into wanting to do more about conservation. And I'd been studying in Australia for my PhD, deep into GPS technology, high precision, long distance surveys for millimeter accuracy was what I was studying. But we'd go out and camping. And of course, Australia's got everything dangerous, basically. Don't touch anything because it's going to bite or kill you. And compared to New Zealand, where practically nothing can kill you, it was a good learning curve.
Wow.
But with people that were spotting cool plants and orchids, as well as the bats and all this stuff, got back to New Zealand and was just reminded of the variety of nature. And then there's opportunity with work came up to travel to Antarctica.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it was a super special opportunity. So I was 7 weeks down on the ice, went down on the American program. So hanging out with the 2,000 odd people at McMurdo, and about 3-4K away, there's the little New Zealand base of 70 to 90 people.
Oh, wow.
But when you're out surveying, and we had the opportunity to go out, we're super lucky, in the sense you're going to places where there's rocks in Antarctica. Of course, that's where you need to put survey marks because we're looking at movement and that. And of course, near rocks, there are penguins, there are seals. And so you had this wonderful nature experience. But when we went to South Pole, and you're a couple of K from the South Pole, and this is only 2.5 kilometers high at this point, but it's dead flat, it's white, and there's no sound at all.
Oh, wow.
And you only hear your breathing, and you only get a little bit of ear noise going past you of the wind. And then, of course, when the wind's strong, you got that wind noise. But you're just there quiet, nothing. You can't smell anything.
Wow.
Well, that's not quite true. Of course, you can smell yourself because you've been sweating it out and it's hard work type of things. But there's no other smells. And then when we came back from Antarctica, landed back in Christchurch, there's dust, there's noise, there's smell, there's all of this stuff. And you're just going, wow, our senses. What parts of our senses are we using most of the time that we don't realize are turned on? And I think that's the part in Hong Kong. Not many people can go to a quiet place. You always have air conditioning. You always have road noise. It's very hard just to listen to the bugs chirping. And of course, in Antarctica, there was no bugs chirping on the grass. There was no birds flying past. There was no bees. It was a really interesting reminder. And so all of that together with my conservation interests and technology and doing things, I decided I couldn't write standards any longer for the government department. And so it was a case of I was writing, not interacting with people to really develop the standards. You were doing a slight isolation because I was a little bit still, junior in the rankings. And so I went out and ended up working for an engineering company under my own standards that I'd written at the government doing survey work. Now, there's always a good practice point. So if you ever need to write a document, just make sure you switch your location, your perspective, and then try and see how well you've written those instructions. And that was a wonderful learning curve. And of course, I was able to feed back to the colleagues this different perspective. And we're going back to the photography idea. It's like I now knew a lot more because I was doing something rather than thinking I knew how things were done. And this is the fun of trying stuff out that I love. And that's where the technology kind of got me into talking to people about technology and realizing that I could train people on technology. And that's where the team building thing came through more and more at work. So I became doing like ISO 9001 training, helping people with new equipment, so procedures and that, where I'd go into people and say, we've got this manual. I know you use it. And I say, well, I don't use it fully to them because I didn't. And I know that you will be breaking the rules there somewhere. And I want to know why you're breaking the rules, because I know you know which rules you're breaking, because there must be something wrong with the way the manual's written. So let's understand what's wrong with the manual, look at the risks of why the manual was written a certain way, and then look at what you're seeing as a better way of doing it. And that was a great way to interact with people, because it's not saying, hey, you got to do this right, clipboard officer. No, no, no. It was, can we improve this? And why are we making the decision that this is better?
So just if you don't mind, so you came here doing a sort of a team building under this franchise or whatever, but was it a sector specific? Was it concentrated, for example, in engineering consulting, or was it just broad, anybody who wants this?
Anyone. So if anyone's familiar with things like Myers-Briggs or DISC or Hampton, it was a variation on that. And it was a version, I'd had a number of these, being government department, a large engineering consultancy firm. You've had these team building days. but they often were weird things that I never remembered. And the Myers-Briggs ones, I think it's great. It's just that I don't remember the name, even to this day. M-I-N-E-N-T, whatever. Whereas the simple thing was, I'm a supporter, or I'm a star, or I'm a creator, deal maker, or I'm a mechanic. And all of those words, you kind of instantly know, I think that's the kind of person. And then the order that those people work together, you know, if you say to my wife, Louise, who's very much an introvert, she's a Lord type of person. She's kind of collecting, watching the numbers, collecting everything's right numbers. And I say, should we do this? And the first thing is, well, how are we doing that? It's like, no, that's not a word that I don't know. That's like a sword chopping me down. It's like, I don't know how we're going to do it. It's just like, should we do it? It sounds like a good idea. And then you need to work to the people that know other people, i.e. through the support deal network, so that you can go, this person's tried it. They know this person that's doing that. Then you build up your bit of how. Then you bring it through to the mechanic that goes, right, now we can really make it, fine tune it. Think of the motor mechanics, like we can get this engine running really cool by doing this and this, but they got the general concept. Don't get them to build the car, just get them to fine tune it type of thing. That's where, for me, it was sector wide, but of course, my contacts, my background from an engineering, surveying, and environment attracted people that I was meeting from that space. But that was the only reason.
Okay. I know that you are, by interest, profession, training, somebody who you're a good storyteller. I mean, like, what I love is that now that I'm getting to know you better, somehow we've managed to travel to New Zealand, then Australia, and then, you know, Antarctica. I had no idea. And then we come back to Hong Kong. And one of the things that I find really amazing, so for example, in Canada, you know, when we would kind of make dinner, Friday night dinner, there was always soup, right? And you could just leave soup overnight on the stove and then eat it in the morning, and it's fine. Whereas here, like in Hong Kong, I feel like the sort of the, I don't want to call it the viral load, but the sort of, there's so much alive around you, is that you leave something outside overnight, you've got everything from these mega cockroaches to, I mean, it's going to get funky like so quickly.
Yep.
Yeah.
You do have to remind listeners too that you're probably talking in parts of Canada like parts of New Zealand. If we're out bush, you know, in the campaign going mountains and that, when we say put something outside or leave it out, the hut you're staying in, sometimes it's frozen outside. I mean, it's ice cold, so it's like colder than the fridge. So good luck to anything that's going to eat that. But I do know, even in the house situation, what you're talking about. There's critters crawling around and flying around and jumping around all the time here.
Sure. I mean, which is really interesting to have the juxtaposition of, for example, Antarctica, where you said, where, you know, when you go to the pole, it's quiet. You barely smell anything. And for example, I live in a world of smells. So I could see, like, for myself, you just telling that story really kind of raised that for me.
And taking that part a little bit, because while we're filling in time waiting for, 8 hours of GPS measurements, we were next to both like Scott and the Munsden's huts, and we were lucky enough to go inside those. And you walk into this hut, and here's the seal that's been on a table. No, penguin, not seal. Penguin. It's been on a table for over 100 years. And there's a biscuit tin still sitting there with biscuits next to it. And you walk in and going, there's no smell, but I can see a dead animal. That's strange. The brain's got, I was like, there's one of the senses is missing something here. What's going on?
Wow.
And just that, again, is part of that things that we walk into a situation and our perspective is going to be, we're expecting this to happen. Or get this experience. And that's what I love about looking at things from different ways or different perspectives.
Well said. I'm going to take this moment to switch over to the next photo. So the next photo is called Another Sad Beach Scene. And the photo is, I mean, if I did a kind of survey of the images in the Shooting It Raw library now, there'd be a few. I mean, not many, but there'd be like 3 or 4, maybe 5 photographs of beach scenes where there's garbage across the sand. And in this case, the majority of the image, like it's essentially the plane of the photo is there isn't much perspective, so it's very flat. and across the whole field. And if you looked at it as a kind of abstraction, it would be quite pretty because, you've got the brown of the sand, you've got the blue of the plastic, the white, the yellow, the red. But it's obviously not a question of it being pretty at all, because at the bottom, where I guess you are the one who was making the photograph, we can just see your shadow giving a thumbs down image, and the photo is called Another Sad Beach Scene. And so why don't you walk us through this image?
Yeah, it could be beaches anywhere in the world. This is the sad part these days. And I say sad. Why do I say sad? And what have we been trained to think that is sad? It's not natural in the sense that it's not other creatures putting stuff there. It is humans putting a lot of stuff on beaches. And where I'm going with this is plastic is not a bad thing. It's just how it ends up in our environment and how we're seeing it lasting longer than we're expecting or liking it to. So this beach actually is in Moiwo, and it's the Silver Mine Beach, which normally is swept beautifully clean 6 times probably a day, so that people coming to the beach never see it. This is the story of gazetted beaches in Hong Kong. They have continual cleaning crews.
Yeah.
And so most people go to the beaches of Hong Kong and think, what's all this story about plastic on the oceans? What's all of this stuff? You only have to turn up in the morning, and this is after about the time of the year we're coming to. Heavy rains are about to start. Things get flooded. And this can be in Hong Kong. This can be anywhere. It could be in mainland. It could be beaches and rivers in New Zealand. It doesn't matter where we're at. Stuff gets washed into the rivers, and then all of a sudden it's focused down and comes out the Pearl River Delta. And then this wraps back around onto the beaches here. And so this was one of those. And the shot is actually looking along the beach. And if I tilted the camera up a little bit, you'd have seen lifeguard towers and hotels and houses and things like that. But it was all about just kind of stopping and looking at all the different things that are in there and where they come from and the journey of it. And so there's people that are way cooler at doing this than me. And I love the way that there's ones that are using colors of the different plastics and matching different things that are natural with the plastic. So for me, it's this case of like, here we go. We're going to have a couple of days of really hard work loading up this stuff off the beach. Because we think that's a good thing to do, working with the cleaners and putting it in plastic bags, non-biodegradable, stuff straight to the landfill. And there's a lot of it that could have been separated out and could have then naturally decomposed somewhere, because it's not going to decompose in the landfill because they're run as a dry chamber to basically mummify stuff. Things don't disappear in landfills in the skull. So that's that photo, and there's many beaches and many people that have inspired me and still inspire me to do this type of thing. I've kind of gone from the beach cleanup person to I'm trying to get to the top of the cliff to put a fence at the top to kind of help slow the flow of stuff entering our environment. And that's where I spend my time more now than on the, you might say, at the bottom of the cliff where it's too late for the ambulance to get to.
Right. So just the surface area of the photograph is probably, it's not very large. It's probably the size of a 700 square foot plot of land, or like it's not a huge
volleyball court maximum size.
Not
even
very
less
big.
than that, But it goes for a couple of 100 meters like that, and that's just one beach on South Lantau.
And you're looking at hundreds of pounds of garbage. Clearly, most of it is actually the garbage side of it is mostly plastic, right? So it's just. I don't know if it's a question of word choice because of you're from New Zealand and the word sad has a different connotation that I would have chosen, which would be tragic. But tragic, is not technically the right word because nobody, there's no tragedy in the sense of everyone dying.
There's indirect slow death. That's the problem for us, for creatures, animals. That isn't it? It's not like a violent accident. Train crash, plane crash, with a lot of things. But having said that, we're only looking at it probably at a macro scale. We haven't worked out. In amongst that, there's definitely dead fish and critters and stuff like that get caught up on it. And not to mention the microplastics. Yep, microplastics and microorganisms as well.
Right.
So it's again, what are we missing in this story when you're looking at it and going, if I'm thinking it's sad at this level, is that the top of the iceberg or the bottom of the iceberg?
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's move on to the next image because I can see from the thumbnail that it's going to be a little bit brighter, because I think what we're going to end towards is because, for example, like yourself, I'm also, even though I face the ugliness and the tragedy of what we're looking at, I somehow managed to hold on to that glimmer of hope, that little thread of optimism and positivity. So. Hopefully we'll find that thread among the garbage, but I think we will, because the next image is certainly a good place to start. If it's okay with you. Did you want to say more about the previous image?
No, I think we can blend it through. It'll come back to the same thing. I'm sure any one of the next photos goes back to the same topics.
So, I have mentioned before that I'm a little bit crazy, and just from listening to you speak and looking at this image, I know that you two are among the crazier people here in Hong Kong. So the photograph is on a sort of a flat space in Hong Kong trails. The, say, 1/3 of the photo is just sort of the exposed trail ground where you can see some roots, a little bit of these wooden, rock steps that have been carved out or placed. And then you're seated, I guess you're giving water to your dogs. And around you is this really nice, it's not the full-on lush green of the Hong Kong trail. This is more like, I don't know, autumn, maybe even winter foliage in the background. And you have leaning, like looking over your left shoulder, and you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 dogs with you. All of them are off lead, I assume. They seem to be well behaved. So what's this image, you crazy lunatic, you?
Yeah, well, I love dogs and been brought up on a farm, having animals around and farm dogs, always had dogs around. And in this photo at the time, the one closest to me is actually a foster dog that we had, because we ended up helping people, let's say, with wayward dogs. And he was a bit big and aggressive. And after a year, though, he's become, he went from being a foster dog to our dog, and he's been with us 2.5 years now. So Salvador is actually lying on the floor right next to me as we are doing this interview. Oh. He's got down to 32 kilograms now. And there's 2 other dogs actually in this room that I'm sitting in doing the recording. So love dogs being around. So the other dogs, we look after dogs for people when they get caught short with travel or things like that.
Oh, nice.
And so a couple of them are there. And then there's another one, a kind of a black dog with kind of like a few tan spots. Trident, he was a foster dog that we managed to home here in Mui Wo. And we used to live next to his new home. He thought it was great. So I'd walk past and you'd hear this kind of kind of weird dog noise coming from, and he's there at the gate waggling. So you open the gate, WhatsApp the owners and saying, dog's coming with us, and off he comes for a walk.
Oh, sweet.
And the others were 2 other friends' dogs that are saying, hey, you're going for a walk, can you take him for a walk? So quickly, I think I've managed to work out the 6 dogs in that photo. But we're just sitting up on between Nam Shan, which is the saddle when you're driving between Mui Wo to Puyo. There's a track that comes around the ridges and goes back over towards Chima Wan.
Yeah.
And the trees in the background are a reminder too that this is an area that's been reforested. Because Hong Kong trees were basically all chopped down during the wars, and not very, very little part of the bush that's actually native trees in the sense that older growth ones.
Yeah. And
it's only a few feng shui woodlands. And so in this spot, you're actually now starting to see what are gum trees or acacia trees in the background in this area, that the AFCD is now thinning out and allowing the native plants to come back up through. So it's kind of an interesting background. And what I love about the stone steps is there's things here called boulder paths, which are 200, 300, 400-year-old trails, the old road routes. We just got a little conversation happening in the background that someone's sniffing the dog food and someone else is getting a bit upset. So, Salvador, can you go back to sleep, please? Ernie, get your head out of the dog food. No, hey, stop it. This is not what we're doing over the food. Sit down. Thank you. Right. Now, this is the part about best behaved most of the time, just like humans. There's moments where we get to and we say, I've had enough of you, and I'm going to just give you a little niggle. So, hey, both of you sit down. So, it's all good. We're going to have fun here. Thank you. Yes. Right, so
that's
give them both
awesome.
a bit of loving attention. And
That was awesome.
Gone, okay.
That was like right on cue. Oh my goodness. How did they know?
I know, this is the world. It's a perspective. See, we're thinking about the world from a certain sets of vibes, channels, energy. I don't get this stuff at all, but I just know there's some other interwebs,
Sure.
you might say, that
Sure.
we are definitely part of. And it's like, don't get upset with them.
That's
just
hilarious.
say to them, is that the behavior you want, guys?
That's
and
great.
they both agreed no. And one of them's kind of gone and sat down in the corner looking back going,
I have to.
I shouldn't have done that.
Hats off to you though, because I mean, I realize that you're performing. Like the mics are on, and this is great. This is really just handled like a professional. Well done, sir. Well done.
Well, credits to, you might say, Mr. Phil Whelan for putting up with me for the last. It's about 8 years that I've been doing interviews with him on RTHK for Morning Brew, and a lot of fun. Like you say, every time the recording is never going to be your best performance, but it's good practice for the next recording.
Wow!
And you get that happening. So up on the hill where these boulder paths are, these really old stone trails. The cool thing is the government here is often criticised for concreting paths. In the last couple of years, they've sent people off to be trained again on doing stonework to build paths.
Yep,
and they're
I've seen it.
repairing the trails with it. And they're using wood as well as stones. And you're just going, oh my goodness, I don't know if they know how excited some people are for this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure others are complaining, saying, why are they still putting stones here rather than
Right.
concrete? You're just going, it is so cool that they're doing this on our really busy trails.
Yeah.
And that's what I enjoy walking. So take the dogs out for a spin in that place. It's about an 8K loop that we can do the back of the hills around here, which brings you back around the waterfront. And possibly that's a good position that you're coming into Moiwo Bay, that you've got the like the helicopter pad and things like that at the ferry pier. So you come back into the town. But it's a good mix because I get to go up some old boulder steps, through some reasonably nice regrowth forest, plantations, back out through a cemetery, down through a view out across the bay towards Chung Chau and Chimawan. And then you turn the corner and you start seeing all of the massive buildings back in central TST side. And then just to bring you back into reality, it's highly likely you walk around the corner and there's a water buffalo blocking your path.
Yeah.
It's that kind of walk.
Yeah. Lantau Island, for me, I've lived on Lantau. It's such a magical place. I think it's also really interesting that things like this podcast, right? So Hong Kong is one of these really interesting places that it's always been a kind of a place of transition and a conduit, right? Where you have change in terms of either commercial change or commercial movement or cultural exchange. It's a really unique place for that. And right now, with the pandemic, and before that, with the protests, and before that, there's always this kind of change and upheaval and renewal and all this business. And what's kind of interesting is that this podcast and other recordings are capturing a little portrait, right, of this time. And what's really interesting in what you bring to it and your attention and consciousness is that you're this guy from New Zealand who's spent a lot of time looking at the solid landscape, the anchored landscape, right? So for example, the fact that you notice things like these, like the boulder trails, the boulder placements, you're also speaking about it through the filter and the lens of somebody who has done things like surveying and reading the landscape in terms of so you've got the trees and you've got the fauna and everything, but that's all kind of shifting and growing and whatever very quickly on top of this more stable kind of platform or rock or whatever. So
timescales.
Yeah,
Timescales are really important.
Yeah. So it's quite fascinating to have your interpretation and your brain and the awareness, for example, of, because you're around dogs so much and because I'm around dogs so much, I am quite conscious of how their perception and understanding of reading the environment and the world is so different than how we see the world, right? And so
yes.
you have these 5 Hong Kong special type dogs, right? Just they're mongrels, you know, they're like mixed breeds.
Yeah, I think all those animals in the photo are all, very special combinations. None of them are close to looking like a pedigree anything.
Yeah. So it's, for somebody who hasn't been to this part of the world, they might just be like, yeah, well, okay, it sounds kind of interesting and exotic, but what would you say to somebody from New Zealand? And it's really funny because just in the I didn't know you were going to be on this episode, but in the previous episode, I was just like, let's pick on somebody. Let's pick on somebody from New Zealand. And I was just like, no, let's not pick on somebody from New Zealand. And here you are, you're from New Zealand, so I can pick on you. So it's a very, very nice of you to join. But how do you overlay your growing up and your understanding of the world to now walking through these trails? So the setting is quite different. So how do you connect those? How do you create a bridge between those two experiences?
Well, it's saved by the cows on the path here or the water buffalo, because I mean, that's just totally crazy. You know, being brought up in a country where we put all the cows in paddocks and kept them in paddocks and moving them around. You come to Hong Kong and you go, those cows roaming free? I mean, just that's like, I kind of get that in India or those places, but Hong Kong. So it's that kind of amazing variety that Hong Kong has. And I think it's worthwhile pausing on that timescale thing, because you're talking about the energy of Hong Kong and that. You know, we're brought up on craters here. It's volcanic. It's all volcanic. The 9 Pins and out of the Geo Park in the eastern corner. Incredible geology out there. You know, massive meter round hexagonal columns that are ash flow from volcano, not the lava. The ash that's come out of a massive volcano, and then it's formed up to make these pillars. And you're just going back to the first part, like, hang on, didn't this boy say he's brought up on a place that sunk 2 meters, and it's shaking most days, and things puff and blow and wiggle, and you've got that part. But it's a credit to my time in Australia, where you go traveling and you say to someone, what does this Aboriginal place name mean? And it says, the Boiling Mud River that flowed underground. And you kind of go,
oh, wow.
And we're off to see some lava caves that are now hollow lava caves.
Yeah.
And you go, yeah, I get that they've been here 60,000, 80,000, whatever number, insert their years, because the freaking place is named after how it was.
Right.
And it's kind of like, you're just going, yep, okay, they know this place. And that's where then I bring in the land surveying part and my deep dive into GPS. I never knew that there's things called earth tides. There's things that we know there's like ocean tides. But when we were monitoring for sea level movement, we're having to adjust for the weight of the ice still coming off and the rebound of parts of Europe. Because the ice is melted enough that the ground is still springing back at a millimeter or 2 a year. And you're going, so each day with the moon and us spinning, the solid ground is going up and down. And then you go, we're just this, you know, you might say the skim milk on the top of the hot soya milk that's bubbling away underneath, and we're just this little bit of skin on the top that we call hard, that's moving and shaking and that. And that's the interesting part of the science coming in. So when you look at this landscape of Hong Kong, you're going, wow. It was just like yesterday out at Po Toi Island, looking back at Beaufort going, there's very low trees on that. There's hard rock. How many hundreds of years has that been like that? Because I don't believe that there would have been big trees there. And then you go to a place, and for those of you who used to travel to the airport or know Hong Kong Airport in the new spot, out of the Caribbean coast, one of the tower blocks there, or the building states, there's like 8 or 10 really tall towers. And in the middle, or to one side, there's one of them missing. That's because the ground beneath it is just so open with hollow caverns and that. They couldn't build the foundations there.
Oh, I didn't know
And
that.
you're just left going, wow, as a surveyor, when someone buys a block of land, you're normally allowed to do some kind of geotechnical work and understanding. A lot of the land sold here in Hong Kong, they don't get much investigation of the land. So you buy it kind of unknowing what's under the bonnet. And all of this fun of how the property development happens and the interaction with wildlife is keeping me here. But there's one part of the story is like we've missed, and that is, so when we sold the franchise for the team building personality profiling, it was one of those periods saying, okay, maybe I should have spoken some more Cantonese. Maybe I should have known a little bit more about that cultural side. Am I going to put the effort into that, or am I going to put the effort into stuff that really excites me? So as I said, not excited by languages really. I just need to know how to get food, how to say something nice to someone, and the rest can do with sign language, you might say.
Sure.
And so we're pondering, right, where are we going to go now that we've sold the business? Now, the instantly was like, where are we going to go? And then it's like, well, when we get to there, what are we going to do there? My wife and I kind of had a couple of weeks of kind of going, yeah, what do we want to do? What is it about? And where we settled on, and why we're still in Hong Kong, is that I looked at it, and there's such a big companies and trading going on in Hong Kong that if I can have a couple of minutes time with a couple of CEOs and change their mindset, the impact globally from being based in Hong Kong is way more than I could be in New Zealand. And that's where we decided to stay here, because part of the sourcing next to the manufacturing, most of the, in quote, crap that's sent to New Zealand that we choose to buy because it's short-term buying, purchasing that we know the world's going through, which puts the crap on the beaches, is that I can probably do more from being in Hong Kong to keep beaches in New Zealand clean than if I went back to New Zealand and tried to change the mindset of the people purchasing things in New Zealand. And that left us with this fun position that I've been lucky enough, after working for Friends of the Earth for 4 years, doing environmental things around roadside air pollution and food waste, that I got involved with corporates here. And one of the projects I've done with the Pearse business is working with Jardine Matheson, looking at some of their waste strategies.
Oh, wow.
Jardine Matheson, for a few people, might know the name, but not many of the companies. They have property, they have car, they have construction, they have food chains, like that. And across Asia, they employ around 400 to 420,000 people, I think it is. And you then sitting at the boardroom hearing that, and you go, New Zealand capital, Wellington, greater population of Wellington, 400,000. I'm now talking to the boss of who controls the whole of a city that I thought was big.
Yeah.
And you're kind of going, now there's a chance for change.
Right. I think I could talk to you for days. But we
and you gather that I could talk for those days plus some.
but look, but I think what I love is because you clearly have done this before, and you are, you're comfortable with a mic in your face, and you know how to express yourself well. And I like that you've seeded, you know how to seed your speech with things that we can pick up later. So for example, you said, wanted to do a deep dive. And I don't know if that's you being kind of cheeky about seeding for the next photo, because that was a great segue. That I'm going to move us along to go to the next photo, and then see where we end up from there. So you titled it "Pondering What We Do Not Know About Nature on a Dying Reef in the Maldives." So somebody has made a photo of who's close-ish to the surface of you swimming beneath them, and it's you. I'm assuming you're the one in the photograph.
Yeah, correct.
You're free diving, or you're snorkeling, and the tone of the image is mostly this, the beautiful blue of being out at sea, and with reefs beneath you. And so, what's the story of this one? Because what I see is a lot of dead coral. So what's the story here? Yeah. And once you know, you can't unknow. And that's the cool thing about having a conversation with someone.
because others would look at that photo and go, wow, look at those long fins, or wow, look at that beautiful blue water. But instantly we see the impact that's gone on in that place, or we're connecting with it. And yeah, so this was 2.5 years ago, coming up 3 years ago, actually. Thinking about it now, seeing we haven't basically been traveling for 2 years, isn't it? I can't remember. 3 years ago, we were lucky that friends hired a catamaran and we were allowed to join them in the Maldives. And we were off this stage. I was just trying out my mate's wonderful long freediving fins. Now, I'm only about 5 or 8 meters under the water here. You know, these things are stuff that people that know how to use them can go down 40, 50 plus meters easily and come back. So I'm just trying these out. Friends blobbing along on the top, taking a photo, but I am going along going, there's not many fish here. I'm seeing a lot of dead coral. Oh, there's a little bit of live coral. And what people often don't know is white coral's not a good color for coral. Coral should be colorful. And colorful in the case that it can even be black and it's alive, which is interesting when we think about what we think of alive and dead. And this is just such a reminder of me. This photo is one, I love the water. It's one of my, probably better than going bush. It's one of those places I can just blob out and really zone out, even though I get motion sickness. So diving and looking at stuff, I come up and I'm a write-off. The fun part is that you hear things differently underwater. You see things differently underwater. And I really like going past something close and going to the Maldives and seeing how this was and seeing the environmental challenges they have there, having been 18 years before, maybe 20 years before, out on a little reef up on the southern part of the Great Barrier Reef of Australia called maybe Musgrave Island. We had 7 nights out on an island there where we had to take everything. We just camped out there and you could just jump into the little lagoon, go swimming and seeing turtles and everything alive. Coral bleaching hadn't really happened at that point globally at a large scale in recent times. But this in the Maldives is all this coral bleaching going on. And there's so much about the stories about the people, like the tour guide that we're with. And that's saying, look, this has just been amazing change. It's really sad how much has died. What's going to happen? You know, where are we going? Is this sea level rise? Is this climate change? Is this a natural cycle? And all good questions that it's hard to understand when most people are thinking 1 year ahead or 5 years ahead. Is this just a natural cycle? Don't know for that region. So really enjoy that, again, a different lens on the world because our oceans are so big and we know so little about them, and especially open oceans. And we know that at the moment the word seaspiracy brings up a great conversation for many people at the moment. And I say a great conversation because just talking about it, understanding it better, understanding that there's practically no real laws out in the open ocean about what goes on, and the clear felling of grounds in the ocean and the dumping that the knocking down of those forests under the sea is just the same as what we've been trying to stop in parts of the world for years and manage together, working with our ways of how do we live, crop, feed ourselves, survive without destroying what we need. And that's the fun of being brought up on a dairy farm yet again, because closing out with that kind of thought, people say to me, oh, you should be, you should be protesting against deforestation for palm oil. And I kind of go, but do you eat beef? Do you drink milk? Because I was brought up on a swamp that has been drained, which is one of the big issues we know with chopping down rainforests with the carbon sinks on these peat beds. And you're just left going, what looks like a nice green paddock today, or take the UK example, green paddocks, big trees. Are those native forests, or they have been modified, those environments, so much? So it's this kind of thinking that when I'm out exploring, it's like, what don't we know? What are we missing here? And of course, rather than the elephant in the room, the great thing is when you're snorkeling and that is like, what's the big blue thing that comes out of it? And we did, a few hours later, have the pleasure of being allowed to swim alongside a whale shark there. Wow. And that's just like so big, so cruising, so small, and you're just next to it going, yeah, We're just that little mouse next to the elephant.
Right, right. I didn't know where the conversation would go, and let's try to not wrap it up or tie it up into a neat little bow, because the whole thing is the world is complex, and it takes a lot of dedicated energy to think about and explore and all that stuff. So, looking back, thinking about it, sharing, the expertise that you have, what can you say to somebody who wants to somehow get deeper into this kind of world, to kind of find their feet?
Oh, simple. I say there's a couple of two or three or four or 20 things that spring to mind with that. One is pretend you're a 2-year-old. And what I don't have children, so I'm not sure if I'm speaking for the right age here, but basically the stage they get to, why? And just keep on asking why, because the first time, and I did say it 3 times, because the first time you'll get an answer. The second time, when you follow up, someone has to think a little bit longer. And by the third one, you probably get to a point where they've reached their knowledge and there's some uncertainty about whether it's going to be left or right's the better choice. Mm-hmm. So when you go in there, it's like, okay, we've explored that, we've thought about that, we've thinking these considerations and these impacts. And that's all it takes. Taking whatever you're passionate about or annoyed by, which is just passion that's got unused energy yet. You don't have direction. That's what frustration is getting that energy into something that you're actually motivated by rather than depressed by. And so it's that kind of ask the right question and then to assess it. One that I heard, which I just love now and replay back to myself many times, is like, if I make this choice, what am I going to think of it when I'm sitting on my rocking chair in a few years' time? Because I now are on the rocking chair on my porch of a place thinking back on my life and talking about it to someone. Did I make a choice that I can say, at that time, the best thing we knew and the best direction was this? And I went with my knowledge, gut instinct, all of those together and said, yep, I'm glad I tried that.
Nice. Merrin, thank you.
Pleasure. Loving this.
Shooting it raw?
Yes.